Hello and welcome. I am Gimba Umar. Tonight, federal government says it's not considering severing ties with South Africa, even as House of Representatives pledges funding for victims of xenophobic attacks, wishing to take legal action. Proposed airlifting of Nigerians from South Africa by Air Peace suffers setback as carrier cites ongoing registration of those billed to return as reason for delay. President Buhari and other world leaders commiserate with the people of Zimbabwe over the death of former leader Robert Mugabe. And UK opposition parties agreed to block Prime Minister Boris Johnson's call for a snap election, saying he's trying to force through a no-deal Brexit.
On business news tonight, shares of MTN Nigeria hit 3-month high as telecoms giant partially reopens its offices following a shutdown after South Africa's xenophobic attacks reprisal.
And in sports news tonight, Serena Williams set up another chance to equal the all-time Grand Slam record when she faces Canadian teenager Bianca Andreescu in the US Open final on Saturday.
And from Abuja, the Nigerian Immigration Service gives illegal migrants a 90-day grace period to register with the service or face penalties.
The federal government is not considering severing ties with South Africa. Now, that's according to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Geoffrey Onyema, who was speaking after a meeting with the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs. Meanwhile, the Speaker of the House of Representatives says that the House will authorize funding for victims of the xenophobic attacks in South Africa who wish to take legal action. Our correspondent Terry Kumi reports.
The lawn of the National Assembly is an unusual location for a press conference, which is normally held at the Press Corps Media Center. A few days after cutting short his trip to the 50th Commonwealth Parliamentary Conference in Tanzania and suggesting that the House of Representatives might reconvene for one day to address the killings of Nigerians in South Africa, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, in the company of the leadership of the House, briefs the press.
We reject entirely the obvious attempt to change the true narrative of events by casting the recently organized acts of violence as merely internecine conflict between gangs fighting for turf. Unless it is the position of South African government that all Nigerians living in South Africa are gangsters and criminals, we demand that they reject these claims without equivocation.
He goes further to pledge support for the victims of the xenophobic attacks who might want to seek justice.
The House of Representatives is ready to authorize legal funding for those citizens who wish to take legal action against identified perpetrators of the violence, as well as those who sponsored them or permitted their actions to occur and continue. We expect that the government of the Republic of South Africa will conduct a thorough investigation into these allegations and make public their findings, whatever they may be.
According to Mr. Gbajabiamila, the House will invite the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Nigerian ambassador to South Africa, and the chairman of the Diaspora Commission for further investigation and solutions to ensure that the incident never occurs again. While the briefing was on, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was meeting with the Senate Committee on Foreign Affairs. After the meeting, he had this to say.
We're not reaching to the stage of diplomatic ties called off. There are various options. We're not by any means at the stage where we're breaking diplomatic relations with South Africa. We know for a fact that no Nigerian life has been lost, so we're extremely concerned now to ensure that there will be adequate compensation for the property that has been lost and damaged.
The entire country now awaits the return of the envoy sent by President Muhammadu Buhari to South Africa, which will inform his final decision on the matter when he addresses the nation as promised. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
In the meantime, the special envoy sent by President Muhammadu Buhari to South Africa has met with President Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria. It is believed that the meeting between Ambassador Ahmed Abubakar and President Ramaphosa, which held behind closed doors, focused on the recent xenophobic attacks on foreigners and foreign-owned businesses, particularly those that concerns Nigeria. President Muhammadu Buhari had announced his decision to send a special envoy to the South African leader following the outcry that greeted the recent attacks on foreigners and Nigerians in South Africa this week. Ambassador Abubakar arrived in Johannesburg on Thursday and was received by officials of the Nigerian consulate in South Africa. In the meantime, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has slated the evacuation of Nigerians from South Africa for Saturday, the 7th of September. The exercise was initially scheduled for today. In a statement signed by Minister for Consular and Immigration at the Nigerian Consulate in Johannesburg, South Africa, Mr. Anthony Ogbe, it emphasized that the exercise is free and there will be no payment for documents for those without passports. Interested Nigerians are encouraged to register by Friday, 6th of September and be prepared to travel by Saturday after providing necessary information. The president of Nigeria's South Africa Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Folusho Phillips, has described the whole xenophobic attacks as something that should not have happened in the first place. According to him, the signs of the recent violence have all along been present, with both governments deciding to ignore them.
The attacks have been very vicious. They've really caused a lot of unhappiness to people. The kind of message it has sent out has been frightening, and it's made one really question the extent to which the South African government really had or has a handle on things, because some of these things could have been stopped, and they didn't start today. This has been an escalation over many years, if I have to say that, and it seems to have gone up and down, but this time there seems to be a constant and continuous momentum of this situation that has led to what we've witnessed within the last 2 weeks. So it's totally unacceptable. As far as the chamber is concerned, there's no way anybody can say that these attacks are justified. Even the South Africans that have seemingly varied opinion, try and define who it is you're listening to and who is saying things for you to really appreciate what the heart of South Africa is saying. I think most of the people really don't favor this. They think it is ridiculous, and certainly they're not on the side of those that are doing these things. What happened in Lagos even across the country over the last few days is just a phenomenal cost. I looked at some videos, and some shops were damaged. The ShopRite, all shelves were just removed and empty, and it's a huge loss. And you look at the collateral damage that took place as well. It's something that there can be no justification for it, and it's a huge wake-up call to both governments that they've been sleeping, they haven't been doing anything. Nigeria, South Africa, they have ignored their diplomatic relationships, whether economic or social. They just ignored it. Nothing has happened, and they've just been coasting along, and yet it's been like a ticking time bomb. And the warning signs were there all along, but nobody did anything, and it's a shame that it's come to this.
To other stories now, President Muhammadu Buhari has joined other world leaders to commiserate with the people of Zimbabwe over the death of their former leader, Robert Mugabe. President Buhari said in a statement addressed to the family, friends and political associates of the late Zimbabwean leader that his sacrifices, especially in struggling for the political and economic emancipation of his people, will always be remembered by posterity. It describes Mr. Mugabe as a political activist who fought for the independence of his country from colonial rule and lived most of his life in public service. Former President Mugabe had been receiving treatment in a hospital in Singapore since April before passing on this morning at the age of 95. Mugabe won Zimbabwe's first elections after the country secured independence from the UK in 1980, becoming its first prime minister. Robert Gabriel Mugabe was a man who divided global public opinion like few others. To some, he was an evil dictator who should have ended his days in jail for crimes against humanity. To others, he was a revolutionary hero who fought racial oppression and stood up to Western imperialism and neocolonialism. Our next report takes a look at the life and times of the late Zimbabwean leader.
Robert Mugabe was born on February 21, 1924, in what was then Rhodesia, a British colony run by its white minority. In 1964, he was imprisoned for more than a decade without trial after criticizing the government of the day.
We want full and unfettered democracy. Down with the racist constitution, down with the dirty elections.
While still in prison in 1973, he was chosen as president of the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, of which he was a founding member. Once released, he headed to Mozambique, from where he directed guerrilla raids into Rhodesia. But he was also seen as a skilled negotiator. Political agreements to end the crisis resulted in the new independent Republic of Zimbabwe. With his high profile in the independence movement, Mr. Mugabe secured an overwhelming victory in the Republic's first election. But nearly 4 decades after independence in 1980, he was perceived as power-obsessed and willing to unleash death squads, rig elections, and trash the economy in the relentless pursuit of control.
There will never be a regime change here. There will always be the people of Zimbabwe in control.
In 2000, facing serious political opposition for the first time, he seized white-owned farms to resettle black farmers, causing economic disruption but boosting his popularity among supporters. Around the same time, pro-Mugabe militias used violence to influence political outcomes. In 2008, when he lost the first round of the presidential election, attacks on the opposition resulted in his rival pulling out of the contest. However, he was forced into sharing power in 2009 amid economic collapse, installing rival Morgan Tsvangirai as prime minister.
Do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Zimbabwe.
An unapologetic leader, Mugabe portrayed himself as a radical African nationalist competing against racist and imperialist forces in Washington and London.
The Western countries, in particular the United States and the European Union, who imposed illegal sanctions against Zimbabwe, have, to our surprise and that of SADC and the rest of Africa, refused to remove those sanctions. If they will not assist the inclusive government in rehabilitating our economy, could they please stop their filthy, clandestine, divisive antics?
But in 2017, amid concerns that he was grooming his wife Grace as a successor, the army, his longtime ally, turned against the president and forced him to step down on November the 14th.
I thank you, and good night.
In part two, after the break, traffic intensifies around Kara Bridge Beggar axis along the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Commuters facing tough times blame construction work on the road and broken down trucks. Stay with us.